everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
I think the biggest strength of AI and new AI, aka LLMs, is also its weakness, which is item potency. So it's hard to predict. Item potency means, for folks out there, that you can predict every time that you get a certain result. And LLMs aren't like that. And that's exactly its strength. That's what makes LLMs human or human-like, is that you can ask it a question and it can answer in 10 different ways.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Phil Markunas, co-founder and CTO of Standard Practice.ai. Welcome to the show today.
Well, it's great to be here. It's great to see you.
All right. Thanks, Phil. So, Phil, let's talk about the kind of the broad picture. What are some issues with the healthcare that you guys are trying to solve?
Sure. So we started a previous company called Devpost Health, and when we did that, this was a credit card company that, as an employee benefit, allowed people to pay for large medical expenses in small bites over time. And in creating this credit card platform, I was talking to medical back office professionals every day, and these folks, they said the same thing every time I talked to them, which was, hey, we spend all day on the phone with insurance and we don't get paid quickly. We're put on hold. We finally get to someone and they don't have the information. And, this is a huge problem in the US. So there's about $1 trillion of US healthcare administrative costs every year. And 3.2 billion phone calls are made every year for healthcare processes, which is staggering. Over 1 million healthcare professionals spend over 4.5 hours every day doing these calls. And, those are the stats. But, when I was speaking with them, I kind of put a personal face on it. So there's a lot of difficulty, a lot of suffering, they can't get the calls done and they can't get paid because there's just too much to do. And this is only one kind of function of a medical back office professional, is making calls. Very often they're doing other paperwork and all the other tasks dealing with patients. And so really this is an epidemic in US healthcare. And what Standard Practice is designed to solve is just this pain point. So we automate outbound calls for medical practices to insurance, to pharmacies, to patients. And in so doing, we can not only free up people's time to help deal with patients and get better patient outcomes, but we can also reduce employee burnout and eventually, or inevitably, help practices make more money faster.
All right, so let's make sure that the audience has a clear understanding of what the problem is. So again, we're looking at it from the lens of the medical practice. These are medical groups, physicians, whatnot, providers of some sort of healthcare services, and they're looking to get paid or reimbursed either from insurance, pharmacies, or directly from their end clients or patients. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right. So specifically, we're talking about accounts receivables function that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So in that regard, what are kind of the general average time periods for these medical practices to receive payment from the time that they send some sort of claim?
Sure. So you can imagine, every practice has their own massive AR kind of backlog, and most payments are received, within 30 to 60 days. However, there's a large amount that actually goes unpaid as well. And that's another problem that we can help solve, is kind of help people really dig into their backlogs, AR backlogs, in an automated fashion. The first 30 to 60 days, this is kind of the low-hanging fruit. but there's a lot of unrealized payments that they just don't have time to collect, and we can help automate that process and help folks recoup that.
And I remember a few years ago seeing some sort of study around the fact that when it comes to accounts receivables, many times it's not necessarily that the payers are looking to shirk or to not pay, but it requires reminders. And I think there's a certain correlation where if you remind them enough times, they're more likely to pay, or the increase of paying like a likelihood increases. Is that a fair statement?
I do think that's a fair statement. I wouldn't. That is a fair statement. I don't think I would put any malfeasance or explain anything by malfeasance that can be explained by incompetency or just by being overwhelmed. And so many payers, as well as many patients, everybody wants to pay. Everybody wants people to be healthy. But you're right that everyone's busy. And so even payers whose job it is to pay practices for the services rendered often require many reminders just to kind of get the payments done.
Okay. So I'm going to get into some of the granularities on the platform itself. But again, if you could reintroduce standard practice and why is this different from what's already out there?
Sure. So there are a couple solutions out there. However, kind of why standard practice came about now is because of the popularization of LLMs, specifically pre-trained models that, as you already know, things like ChatGPT, they take the entirety of human knowledge as represented on the internet. They pre-train models to be able to have realistic conversations, answer basic questions in such a realistic way, that sometimes hard to tell that's not a person. This is really different than how traditional ML, aka machine learning, has been handled. So traditionally, NLP, or natural language processing, this required large teams of engineers, often with PhDs, certainly with masters, highly trained, very expensive personnel with large proprietary data sets that were required to build these NLP models. So instead, these pre-trained models like ChatGPT have really revolutionized what companies can do. And so this was a perfect time for us to kind of jump in towards the end of last year is when we started. Took about 4.5 months from kind of idea to in-market MVP. So it's a very exciting time for us. But so this is the right time for this product. But we're not just a wrapper around LLMs, as many folks are in the AI space. So there are a lot of, I would call it frothy. It's quite popular. But LLMs aren't a silver bullet. For me, LLMs are just a fundamental technology, like a web server or something like that. And LLMs will become, in my opinion, part of every engineering team's tech stack. And so for us, what we're really building is an orchestration layer around LLMs that can send out 1,000 calls at a time, receive all that data back, and work seamlessly and intuitively into very complex workflows, which is what we're building right now.
Okay, great. Thank you for that overview. So let's, before we get into technology, let's talk a little bit about some of the use cases. So again,
Sure.
You talked about kind of the primary, which is trying to get paid.
Mm-hmm.
But, once we go deeper, there are lots of sub-specific use cases. And something for a physical therapy is going to be very different from, let's say, cancer therapy, cancer treatment, something that's catastrophic, something that maybe has a lot of limitations. Let's say certain type of disability type of insurance that is finite or has very specific caps. So talk to us about how does the system understand both from a contractual reimbursement, codes, and just, where are kind of the sweet spot of your use cases and where are the edge use cases that you guys will not be as effective in?
Sure. So I think the sweet spot initially for us are in very kind of tightly defined use cases that don't go too far off the reservation, which this actually applies to probably the majority of phone calls that are made, such as like claim status checks, prior authorization, benefits eligibility. These do have some complexities, but nothing that, our logical systems, as well as the flexibility of LLMs, can't handle, which is really the strength of LLMs and why it works so well in this use case. When I go into medical practices for the first time, I often find that I have to kind of get people into a new way of thinking about how to work with a digital product. So working with AI is a little bit less like a script. I think we're all used to chatbots where like, hey, if you ask this question, then answer like this, or if you ask this question, answer like that. We don't have a script. The AI doesn't have a script. It is an intelligence that is flexible. And so it's more like working with a junior employee where you can say, we can feed in a contract. Let's say you said, there are various contractual requirements, things like that. And you can feed in a contract and say, hey, if you get to this kind of situation, take a look at this contract. You might find the answer there. And so you can treat the AI a little bit more like as you would with an employee. And I think in a similar way, you can ask those kind of questions. So instead of analyzing spreadsheets of stats, you can just ask, hey, you just did 100 calls, like what should I look at? And so I think our relationship to digital products is changing and the way that we can use them.
So I remember seeing a study a few months ago where specific to the healthcare industry, they were fairly reluctant to large language models. And of course, as we know, the industry is heavily compliant, heavily regulatory intensive. And whether it's HIPAA or other types of requirements, it's just incredibly difficult. And again, I think there's a big perceptual change management that still has to be overcome. And I don't even think we're talking about your firm's specific product or service. We're talking about just overall beachhead into healthcare from a advanced Gen AI, for example. So talk to us about what is the market receptivity in the sense of the market signals that you guys receive prior to actually really being active in the market, selling, right? Versus in the MVP where you're getting feedback on your product attributes, there's going to be incongruency because what they tell you is not necessarily the truth.
That's right. So I think you hit on a really good point, and that is, the highly regulated nature of the healthcare industry, which makes it really hard to enter, but also sort of in a good sense for us as a startup also provides a moat once we do achieve it, which is really great. We are HIPAA compliant, so that isn't a big deal. For us, I mean, it is a big deal, but we've already achieved this. We're seeking SOC 2, type 1 and 2 as well, and other security benchmarks, we're audited, things like that. But in terms of the core technology, so you're right that there is occasional hesitancy, both from consumers, practices, as well as kind of incumbent companies. So folks like Infinitus Systems, that's kind of a direct competitor. They're based on legacy NLP technology, and they're sticking with it for this reason. That's what they say. But for us, we believe, and so far we've shown that we can make the new AI/LLM technology compliant, and I think the biggest strength of AI and new AI, aka LLMs, is also its weakness, which is item potency. So it's hard to predict. Item potency means, for folks out there, that you can predict every time that you get a certain result. And LLMs aren't like that. And that's exactly its strength. That's what makes LLMs human or human-like, is that you can ask it a question and it can answer in 10 different ways. And how we combat this, is through many different things, but we have constant monitoring and alerting. we have quantitative benchmarks that show us when our models go certain standard deviations outside of baseline. We also have guardrails where we control the input that goes into our LLMs as well as we control the output. And we also have, toxicity alerts and profanity alerts, everything else, sentiment. We analyze the sentiment of every single call, and people have full transparency. They get the recording, they get the transcript, and they get all the sentiment and other results of every single call. So we built it with transparency and security and compliance in mind from the very beginning.
So I want to talk about two specific topics. One is around accuracy and the other one is around action quotient. On the accuracy side, this is important because of the ramification of legal liability, not only to the subscribers of your SaaS platform, but effectively you guys as a vendor. The reality is Google and many others that have so much greater intensive resources, even they're struggling to push out products that are accurate, that are hallucination free or just erroneous outright. So as a small company, how do you deal with the accuracy issue? And given the fact that because we're talking about the context of healthcare and the heavy regulation and the penalties, there are going to be legal issues and lawsuits. So let me just pause there. And then the second part I'll come back to is around action quotient, which is getting to not just the human interface around the interface of NLP, but the actual ability to transact and take event-based triggers to all the way through.
Great. So in terms of accuracy, in addition to all the kind of methods that I described before that we have in place, and that does make our model quite accurate. I think that there are a few answers. So one is we're limiting our product scope and what we're aiming at the beginning to handle kind of lower cost use cases and ones that are more limited in scope. So, we're not handling brain surgery day one. We're starting with benefits eligibility. Are you covered? And are you covered for this? And that's one. Two is, it's challenging even for a human to get answers from payers. Very often you can call a payer 3 separate times and you could get 3 separate answers. So we can combat this by just kind of infinite scale. So we can make the call 10 times and we can make sure we get the right answer. Whereas a human, unfortunately can't, we're limited. And so in addition, we don't give medical advice. We're not tackling telehealth in the sense of like giving, predictions or talking about ailments or prescribing medicines. We're not doing any of those things. We are mostly calling insurance companies, but also pharmacies and patients just to get the information right and return it to practices because that's the information that they need.
So let me give you a very likely use case or an example where certainly with humans, they're going to make mistakes, including errors in typing in the medical code or the service code, let's say. And if the data entry in the system is incorrect, your orchestration, your system is going to reference something that's inaccurate, whether it's a wrong service that's referencing or it's a wrong code, wrong reimbursement, wrong amount. Nonetheless, it's still going to be wrong. And there could be cases where it could easily kind of blow out of proportion. And again, the liability question starts to come up. And it's less about whose fault it is as much as who's involved in that workflow are all liable.
No, that's right. I don't think that scale in the sense of standard practice really changes the sort of amount or surface area of the liability. So if a medical practice group has a call center and their whole call center is liable, we would share in whatever liability is there, just in the same way that a human would. In a similar way, garbage in, garbage out. If you get bad data in, then you will get bad data out. That being said, we do have ways to comb through the data to tell, hey, this is probably wrong or this is probably right. We also have humans in the loop. So we have alerts internally to tell us, hey, we need to jump in and take a quick look. Let's have another discerning eye on it, as well as the benchmarks that we mentioned before that are quantitative in nature. And we know that, when things are kind of going off the rails, if they do happen. And so I think in that regard, we are not superhuman. We're creating a product that scales kind of a human response, and it has the same limitations as a human would.
So again, I think the next question example is maybe perhaps a little bit dated, but nonetheless, there are some pretty big tech companies that have claimed pretty advanced AI capabilities when in fact it turned out that behind the scene, they're effectively humans that were supervising or watching. So it was almost a one-to-one oversight of every transaction. But before I go there, I want to go back to the action quotient, which is the next frontier, aside from the multimodal aspects of AI, is action quotient, where it's not just simply the interface to data and systems, but its ability for us to enact and then the systems then implement, whether it's paying for certain services rendered, whether it's actually doing anything, any type of transactional thing. So in that regard, once you get into the transactional, so for example, receiving or taking down credit card information, running that through, what happens if it's wrong? What happens if the system gets it wrong, and instead of charging, let's say, $2,500 for services render, it ends up charging for $250,000. Again, something ridiculous that,
Sure.
assuming that the credit limit allows.
I've actually had that happen to me in real life. I bought a little table, and it was supposed to be $150, and they charged me $1,500 for it in real life. Real human, real story. So I totally agree with you. So the action quotient. So once real transactions are enabled on the platform, this is a different degree of difficulty and a different degree of things that could go wrong. As a result, we are not starting with payments. We are not starting. We give no medical advice. We simply go get information, confirm it, and bring it back. And this itself is incredibly challenging. And again, over 1 million medical professionals, this is what they do every day. This is a big job. And it is complicated. But the truth is that, if a number is wrong, whether it's because of a data entry error, on the part of the human using the system, or, we say it wrong or we hear it wrong, it can be confirmed again. And so, we have systems to kind of tell this is probably right or probably wrong. We do have humans in the loop, HITL, which is a very common practice as, in traditional ML in terms of supervision and data labeling. I think where it's less fun are things that you mentioned, where people or companies are claiming to, be totally AI and totally automatic. But that's just not the truth. There are humans in the loop, and I think we want that. We are serving people in the end, and I think we want people to have oversight and to know what's happening. And that's really why we built in transparency from the beginning.
So let's briefly talk about the stack. So again, to your point earlier, most AI something companies, startups in particular, are claiming a lot of things, but underneath, they're really, like I said, a wrapper or a consumer of some sort of API services, microservices, or they're just simply layering on top of various open source. In your case, what exactly is your IP that's uniquely yours, that it's your set of code base, and how are you guys playing with other Gen AI foundational models?
Sure, absolutely. So to be, very clear, what you're saying is absolutely right. Like, we are not building foundation models. We are not intending to, and we do not. As you're, very aware, these are very expensive to build. So one pass of ChatGPT in terms of one training pass can cost upwards of $5 million, and this was ChatGPT 3.5. And so now I imagine, I don't think they've released the training costs for like 4.0 or things like that, but I imagine that it's even exponentially more than that. And so this is not the playground of small companies. And so it's not our playground. And then, so I guess this begs the question, what value do we offer? And so what I would say is I think it all has to do with the problem that you're solving as a company. I think if you're solving an easy problem that is really solved by the LLM itself, then it is just a wrapper. Like, hey, can you summarize this document? Sure. Any foundation model can do that, very basic query, and you don't need a company around it. Just use the model. However, we're very different. So, standard practice, we are in a very deep vertical that has huge domain expertise requirements. As you said, also highly regulated, very complex workflows that are even very different in different parts of the US and different specialties. This is a vastly complex problem. And LLMs are not a silver bullet. For me, again, it's very similar to a web server. It's just a foundational technology. Every company doesn't build their own web server from scratch, but that doesn't mean that they're not building vastly complex technical products. And that's exactly what we're doing.
So just a little bit on kind of the ecosystem is that OpenAI for obvious reasons of ecosystem and network effects are really trying to foster startups to embed their technology into the end products or higher value add products that other startups are creating on top of that. But as we have seen with other ecosystem plays is when the primary system provider decides to change their strategy, their pricing, whatever model, it has a cascading effect to the point where some of the startups that are in those ecosystems could literally shut down overnight. So how reliant upon is standard practice to some of these other heavy, large players, or are you fairly insulated?
Sure. So, I have built standard practices tech stack from the ground up with the idea that any company or any foundation model could, number one, could go away at any time. They could raise their prices in a prohibitive fashion for us. That's on the negative side. Also on the positive side, new models are coming out every day. OpenAI does not have a monopoly on foundation models, and they're still probably one of the best, if not the best. But I don't imagine that kind of stranglehold will last for that long. There are a lot of great players out there. And so, we have an abstraction layer. So we can switch out models at will. We can use OpenAI, we can use Llama, and we can switch it out to whatever the market demands. So we've built it with abstraction and flexibility kind of in there from the start.
Yeah. And we're definitely seeing that with a lot of the cloud providers where they're really effectively providing a cafeteria plan. Now, the last question I have is something that I think all of us recognize, but perhaps maybe we don't talk about explicitly, is that the GenAI.com bubble will burst. And I don't think it's a matter of if it's going to burst as much as when it's going to burst. So when it does, how likely will your company survive the aftermath?
Sure. Number one, I absolutely agree with you that we are in a Gen AI bubble. I think that it is similar to the crypto bubble that just happened, and we saw how that kind of turned out. That being said, crypto is still around. It's still at the foundation of some aspects of our financial system. People still use it, but I think it's not the technology, in my opinion, that goes away. I think what goes away are the frivolous use cases that didn't really need to be there in the first place. The AI wrappers and things like that, all of those will go. I think what will remain are the true pain points and the true products that serve those pain points. I believe at Standard Practice that we do have a powerful pain point that needs to be solved, and that will remain whether we use AI or not. And so, you know, we use AI right now, but if it were something else in the future, quantum computing comes out or some other type of technology, we are flexible. We are a team of experienced and highly trained engineers who can build anything that we need to. And whatever the technology is, we can solve this pain point and move forward with it.
All right. So with that, I have been joined by Phil Markunas, CTO of Standard Practice.ai. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you, Scott.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.